Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, myself, Ashley Coffin, and Paul Hoppy are talking about Dark Phoenix. We're talking about Charles, Professor Xavier, and the choices he makes. We're talking about what do you do with mutants who cause problems and hurt others. We're talking about can a group that is hated and feared be the perfect model minority and become loved? And we're talking about just how badly did they take the Dark Phoenix story and wreck it once again. All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. I'm Matthew, your host. I'm joined by Ashley and Paul. The three of us have been having a great time diving into some things, and recently I had the urge to watch some X-Men movies. No idea why, not connected to any TV shows or anything lately, but I realized I had never seen Dark Phoenix. I'd heard a lot of horrible, terrible things. I'd heard some good things. I wanted to check it out, and I started watching and immediately realized there's a lot of feelings people have about this movie, good and bad, and we'll talk about that, but there's also... This movie raises some of my favorite questions about the X-Men, about mutants, about heroes, and I wanted to get some folks on to talk about it with me. And Ashley, I know you're a huge X-Men fan, and Paul, you and I have had a lot of conversations about these movies, so I'm super excited to dive into this with both of you.
Yeah, I'm excited to actually talk about this movie because I don't think I've gotten the chance to with anybody, and I have a lot to say.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that looking back, this is the first X-Men or any kind of MCU superhero movie I just didn't see. And I think it's because it came out right when a lot of we were right in the heart of the MCU and so much was going on. The last couple X-Men movies had not been very good. But I mean, looking back on it, I'm kind of wondering why I never saw this. I think it's just like the X-Men had kind of faded for me. Faded by interest by then, I guess. We all knew we all knew Marvel had bought Fox, and so this timeline was kind of going away. Paul, what about for you? Did you see this movie when it came out? Did you have big excitement about it? Where were you about it?
Yes, no, and somewhere in the middle. I'm just kind of along for the ride today, I'll say. But I saw this movie when it came out. I did not rewatch it. Lee actually didn't want to go see it, which is weird because she's the one who's actually much more interested in the X-Men in general, and but she can get kind of turned off by horrible reviews. So I think seeing them butcher the Dark Phoenix storyline once was like enough for her, because it was a storyline that I know she really enjoyed from the earlier portrayals, and so had I. And when I saw the first Dark Phoenix, it wasn't a Dark Phoenix, what was it, X3, right? Where they did the Dark Phoenix storyline, I was sort of like, okay. Like, I just kind of thought it was a bad movie. And, she was like, no, it's a cool storyline in the animated series and in the comics. And I saw the animated series. My opinion might have been swayed by the amazing theme song. That just kind of gets you in the mood to like anything. But... But I do.
The animated one was great.
It's so good, so good. I mean, there have been actually several really good animated X-Men series. But like, and I liked the storyline in that, and then I saw it here, and I was kind of like, like I wanted to see it because I mean, sometimes there's just certain movies that I'm just like, yeah, I'll just see it when it comes out. I really like going to movies in the early afternoon. I think there might have been 2 other people in the theater.
No way, me too.
Yeah,
me too.
Right. It's a great way, I think, to experience movies. Like, I don't really need a ton of people there, like telling me when to laugh or whatever. But there were definitely things early on in the movie, especially that was like, oh, this is a really interesting take. And then something happened. And I was like, nope.
Oh, no.
And I think the movie suffered from some kind of corporate overlord overthinking type stuff. But I ultimately I wasn't that excited to see it. I wasn't super disappointed because I wasn't super excited to see it. And, it was like there was some good stuff. There was some stuff I didn't like. And, kind of like it didn't feel like it was the worst X-Men movie ever made.
Mm-hmm. It's
like Apocalypse.
Wolverine Origins.
Wait, that's
the bar for worst X-Men movie, there's a couple of things fighting for it. And I think I would agree with you. This is not one. I'm glad that you brought up X3, because I think at a later point, I'm also going to do an episode about X2 and X3 and the idea of like identity in the X-Men movies, because that's a powerful theme. personally, I think X3 is a fantastic pilot for a season. And that, like, there's so many great issues that it raises.
Right.
The Dark Phoenix being one where it's like, okay, cool. Give me an 8 or 12 episode arc and explore this. You're right. The Dark Phoenix is not really explored in that movie. It's not really explored here. I still have no idea really what it is.
Right.
We're going to talk about that, I assume, somewhat to this. But yeah, I realized I had very low expectations going into this when I rewatched it a couple nights ago. And I found the first half of it I really enjoyed. We get to a moment that made me incredibly angry. I think, Paul, it's the same one, I'm guessing, for you. Maybe not.
Probably.
And spoilers for X-Men Dark Phoenix.
Spoilers.
It's when Mystique dies.
Yep.
Because she'd been far and away my favorite character.
Yep.
But then the way that that's handled, it raises a lot of the questions that I wanted to get into today. But then the last half of the movie just felt incredibly weak. It felt like, and I've heard some of the same corporate shenanigans you have about, like, that they didn't know that they were worried this movie was going to seem too much like some of the MCU movies.
Specifically Captain Marvel, right?
Yeah, which, Captain Marvel, I've also heard comparisons to Civil War or to Endgame and stuff like that. And so it just seemed like an incredibly... Honestly, I felt at the end of the movie, like, I would have loved this movie a lot more if the Dark Phoenix had never been a part of it. And it had just been about, like, Jean and her powers and where the X-Men were, which says something about the main idea of your movie.
Right.
What about for you? Ashley, I know you liked a lot of the parts of this movie. What was your take on this movie?
I have a real soft spot for the X-Men movies just because it kind of, I love the X-Men. I remember going to the comic store every week to get my special pulled 616's comics put to the side to me. I loved the TV show, and Dark Phoenix when I was younger was my absolute favorite character. Not Jean, but when that whole Dark Phoenix saga came, like, I couldn't get enough. Like, I have artwork in my house still that's Dark Phoenix. So I am a little bit more lenient on these X-Men movies, which is totally not like me. But I see this one. I see what they were trying to do with this one. They knew that it was the end and they had to make a complete story. And I think if you look, I went on this journey with you. I didn't tell you I was doing it, but I rewatched all the movies this week too.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And certain characters like Eric have complete story arcs that come to like a really good ending in this one. And there's certain things from that I can focus on to be like, okay, this made this a really good ending to a somewhat sad attempt to go back and change the things you messed up in the first three. Because I felt like Days of Future Past was them just trying to fix what happened in X3. Like you have to go back in there somewhere and fix all that stuff you did. And honestly, it kind of felt like, Simon Kingberg was doing what Charles did and just trying to do what he thought was right.
And even though,
go ahead.
I actually posted on our Facebook group about this. Days of Future Past now creates another timeline that these movies aren't a part of, as far as I can tell.
And there's a rogue cut too, which I really recommend. I liked it a lot better than the original one because they go deeper into Mystique and Hank's love story. Like that's where it starts because it kind of seems out of nowhere in this one, but it does start all the way back in Days of Future Past, and they cut the whole thing out. But the problem with these movies is they don't the canon. It doesn't consistently make sense because if you watch the end of Age of Apocalypse, she's already displaying this Phoenix power, and it seems like they rewrote the entire Dark Phoenix movie after they already had plans for what they were going to do with their character because the ending of that movie now doesn't make any sense.
When you said there was a Rogue cut, I thought you meant there was a cut where Rogue was an actual relevant character who did badass things as opposed to the totally nerfed version in
She is in it. She's in it. Yeah. She takes over Kitty Pryde's position. Because remember, sorry to get left field. Yeah. In Future Past, remember when he slices Kitty open? When he kind of wakes up again when he sees Stripe? Well, he pretty much almost kills her. So Magneto and Bobby have to go save Rogue from wherever they're holding mutants in that future. And they bring her back to keep... She uses Kitty's powers to keep him in the past.
Oh, I could watch
it was so much better, dude.
I'll definitely have to watch that because I mean, this is a totally other topic, but in that one about identity we're doing, Rogue will definitely be a big character because the whole idea of the cure and her desire to have the cure. And
Rogue, why?
They were using her powers to make the Sentinels better.
Right, for sure. And I think there's just I think that whole as someone in the disabled community, I think the debate about whether or not to have a cure is a very real one. And I found that, I could understand where Rogue's character was coming from as well as the other side of it, for sure. But putting all that aside, that's for another episode.
Okay.
Let's use this to dive into Jean's character, because what you said, Ashley, in some ways kind of gets to what I mean about how I'm kind of happy if, for this conversation, at least the ethical side of it, we kind of ignore a lot of the whole idea of this thing from space to begin with, because, as you said, I feel like they already showed us some of that Dark Phoenix at the end of Apocalypse, one of the only good things in a mostly very bad movie. But let's talk about Jean's character, because I think, to me, one of the most interesting, one of the reasons why I love the X-Men so much is all these questions we've talked about that seem to be at the heart and soul of so much of what superhero ethics is all about. Ideas of, if you have a group with great power, who are they accountable to? Who has control over them? What's the relationship between the larger community and the community with powers? How do you bridge those gaps? How do you adjust that? And the fact, Xavier and Magneto, X and Magneto have such different opinions on this. One of the reasons why I love the First Class quadrilogy, I guess, of movies, since now it's kind of 4 of them if you include Days of Future Past, is that instead of it being, Xavier good, Magneto bad, and maybe Magneto okay, it really shows both Magneto and Xavier having a lot of positives and a lot of flaws, especially Xavier. So let's talk about Jean's story, and especially Charles's role in it. What's your take on Jean's character? Like, I guess what we have here is the person who is so powerful that she needs some protection from everybody else. Or everyone else needs to be protected from her to some extent.
It's a shame, because you do kind of see where Charles is coming from with that stuff. Like, Charles means to do good, and his best intentions are always at heart, but he just thinks what he thinks is the best for everyone else is what's right, and that's kind of like taking away their free will.
Right.
And that's what's wrong about it. And, that's how you create supervillains.
I realize I should do a quick summary for anybody who either hasn't seen this movie or who has seen it, but it was a while ago.
Yes, please.
So the idea is that we start out by learning that Jean, when she was a young child, her powers started to manifest. She was in a car with her parents. Her parents got concerned. There was some, arguing. The car crashed, and it seemed that both of her parents died. We later learn that actually her father lived. Her father was, and we can discuss how understandable or horrific or legitimate this was from his perspective. He was very upset about it and sort of felt like he couldn't, raise her anymore. And so Charles creates a situation where Jean believes that both parents are dead, and also that Charles is kind of putting up mental blocks to limit her powers. She finds out that this happened. She confronts her father. She loses her temper. She gets angry. Her father says some kind of very hurtful things about how, you're the person who killed my wife, etc., your mother, etc. Fighting ensues, and Mystique winds up getting killed as part of trying to stop Jean. Mm-hmm. Jean then flees and winds up going to Magneto for a while. We find that Magneto is in this kind of X-Men separatist community, which is a whole awesome thing we'll definitely talk about. Mm-hmm. And they connect, but clearly he wants to sort of support the idea that what she did with her powers, but he also knows that something terrible happened and she won't tell him. And there's blood on her shirt, and he keeps saying, whose blood is it? Whose blood is it? He basically is saying, where's the kid string? It's a great
Where's the boy at?
Where the boy at,
Heimdall.
Exactly. Because, of course, we know that Magneto had very strong feelings for Mystique himself, as well as all of that. Mm-hmm. Discussion. There's a whole bunch about how much this is Xavier's fault. Hank and Magneto wind up teaming up to try and take down Mystique. The rest to take down Jean Grey. The rest of the X-Men fight them. They confront, and then the movie ends. Well,
we're leaving out the villains that I didn't care about.
I know. I'm leaving out all the Dark Phoenix stuff, and that becomes a whole other thing, where what we also find out is that there's this Dark Phoenix power.
Even more of a side note. Did anybody care to look into what the villains were? Because I still don't know. I'm going to guess they were Skrulls. Idea. They were Skrulls? Is that what they were supposed to be? They don't tell us. We have no idea.
I think there's another alien race that's like Skrulls but isn't Skrulls that is used.
Yeah, the Dark Phoenix controlled the universe. It built the universe. It doesn't make any sense. It's not. It needed so much more.
Yeah, they just needed to make it. They were like, you know what? The people are getting mad that we're not following canon, so just make it something from space and make it red.
Well, originally the space thing was like a super critical part of the Dark Phoenix story, right?
Yeah,
right.
And
here
it's so again, in there, but it's not. Like, the point is the fact that you can't summarize the movie effectively. And the fact that we don't even know who the villains were, like, and that doesn't feel like super deliberate. It's not like mysterious, right? It's just
and again, because this isn't a movie review, let's focus on that ethical stuff from Jean and Charles' story, and let's definitely get then to the Dark Phoenix part, which I think is kind of separate.
Okay.
But I should say actually one of the very important part of this though is that they wind up going into space to rescue a space shuttle. And during the course of it, Charles is definitely pushing them very hard and making them take risks that they're not sure they're ready for because he thinks it is so important that everybody love mutants and that everybody see the mutants as the big heroes. And that's something that Mystique is very concerned about. And that will become an important part for Charles as well. And that while they're in space is when she gets hit with the gamma rays, dark radiation, plot point, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But okay, so let's going back to... So we have this mutant who has incredibly strong powers that as a child she didn't have full control over. People got killed. People are upset. Charles takes action. What do we think about what Charles does here?
Again, he's doing what he decided is right. Mm-hmm. And nobody can tell Charles anything different. By this point, he's just full of vanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think convincing her that her dad is dead, like, is not okay. How old is she supposed to be in this movie?
I think she's supposed to be like 8 or 9 when it happens, and then probably like 19, 20 when the main part of the movie happens.
Yeah, so I think there's maybe some argument to be made that doing some sort of psychic intervention to sort of help her through the trauma until she learns to control her powers could be justifiable, you know? But I think then just being like, all right, we'll just leave it that way, you know, is totally unjustifiable. And I think by the time someone's, you know, 19 or 20 or however old she is in this episode, I think it's unreasonable that he would not have actively been like, okay, let's actually address this and try to help you kind of resolve, you know, your life story, essentially.
Right.
His character has a history of doing this. I mean, he did it to Moira.
Right.
And it's just, and
that's just totally not okay.
Mystique's face when she's seeing, like, oh my God, how many people did you do? Like, did you do it to me? Mm-hmm. How many people did you do this to, Charles?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, Xavier is my perfect example of the problem of the do-gooder with so much power, where once you start telling yourself that I'm using my power to do good, unless anybody who wants to stop me is getting in the way of doing good, because I think you said this so well, Ashley, he's not accountable to anyone. You know, there's no one who can tell. He's not sitting down with anyone to say, hey, here's what I think we should do with Dark Phoenix. What should we do?
Right.
And so much of his vanity is tied in it. I think, honestly, that's one of my favorite parts of this movie is they do such a good job of showing, you know, he has the personal phone number of the president. Yeah. He has all this respect and he has, you know, all this power because of it. And it's corrupting. Like, not in a kind of like makes him evil way, but in a like makes him, you know, it's very hard to start saying you're wrong when so much of his, like, I feel like Jean puts him in this very difficult situation because his whole shtick is, hey, look, world, mutants aren't scary. Mutants aren't dangerous. Mutants are, in fact, really helpful. Mm-hmm. And when someone like Jean comes along who is actually possible, and I think a lot of them this is true of, I mean, like a lot of humans in general, but like there is more danger than he wants to make it out to be. Mm-hmm. That's a challenge to him. And so he can't acknowledge that maybe he's wrong or maybe more is needed here.
Yeah. It's like Hank is all of us in that scene after Mystique's funeral. It's like he's holding up a mirror to Charles, and Charles is refusing to admit he did anything wrong and tries to twist it back on Hank, which leads him to be like, we should have been protecting all those kids from you, which is a low blow. But man, what did you expect, Charles? He's begging you to say you did something. Just admit you were wrong. And he's like, no, this is a little bit your fault. And it's like, oh, Charles, don't say that. You cannot get out of this.
I think that's a great way to put it. And honestly, I feel like Hank is my favorite character in this in some ways because of how in the middle he is. Because when he therefore decides to go with Magneto to want to take down Jean Grey to some extent, I have real trouble blaming him. And so let's talk about that moment that happens to it. Paul, I know you said this really upset you. What was it you so much didn't like about the death of Mystique?
It was stupid. It basically... It was like a callback to X3 where they had Jean just dust Scott because he wanted out of his contract. And with all of the rumblings about Jennifer Lawrence wanting out of her Mystique contract, or contract with Fox or whatever, the fact that then she's barely in the movie really felt like, you just, honestly, one of my biggest pet peeves is stupid character deaths. That is,
That's fair.
But the pinnacle of that is if you kill, say, a dog, or a cat, but these instances where it feels like they were writing to something because they wanted something to happen, and it doesn't feel like something that in the moment, made all the sense in the world. And I mean, so that's just in terms of it felt contrived, and it felt like it had to do with external factors outside of the movie, which is always extra annoying. But also, she was the only thing I found interesting, the thing that she was the character I found most interesting in these 4 movies. I felt like they were to some extent her story as much as they were anyone else's story. She was kind of the character who was between, sort of torn between Xavier's point of view and Magneto's point of view, where
very much so, yeah.
And she was I really loved actually in Days of Future Past where she chooses, right? She chooses what to do. And I think that was so important. And then here to basically just kind of write her out as feeling like a plot device, right? Especially when she had then been the thing in the movie that I felt was really, she was the character who was really posing the questions. I was just like, where are you going with it? First I was just annoyed, and then I was like, well, what now? And I feel like it would have been probably a more powerful movie, with her in it than, where it's everybody's motivated by their grief and whatever.
Yeah, I can see that. I feel like someone had to die. I feel like it was important.
You always feel like someone has to die.
Well, I mean, that's also true. But more than that, I feel like...
I understand in this case, though.
Right, and then I feel like part of the point is that Jean Grey has to cross a major line.
Well, I also feel like it was something else that was made to be Charles's fault. He stopped... Beast says, I have the shot, I can take her down. Right. And he pauses him, and he's like, no, I want Mystique to try. And so it was another thing, he's just stopping things and not allowing people to do, what they think they should be doing. Just it's such a cop-out. And then she's, of course, the catalyst to get Eric to turn after he completely betrays the script, after telling Jean, I don't kill people anymore. Revenge is not the way I live. I don't do this anymore. And then literally the next scene, he's like, so we're killing her?
Yeah.
I actually find Magneto the most frustrating character in this
oh, he's my favorite.
Quadrilogy. No, I find him the most frustrating because I find him one of the other most interesting characters, but half the time it feels like he's in a different movie from everybody else, and half the time it feels like his motivations are he's this very interesting, complex character who then the plot just gets to be and now you be evil.
Yeah.
And I find that very frustrating because I'm just give me a Magneto movie like this.
They scrapped it. They were supposed to do one. And that's why it's like the script just keeps betraying that character. Because Fassbender's such a good actor. Like, he really puts all of it. Even moving the helicopters. Like, he's screaming. I believe him. I'm like, oh shit, that's Magneto moving those helicopters. He really puts everything into his performances. And he must read the script and just be like, God damn it.
His heel turn in Days of Future Past is probably the one thing in that movie I dislike most. Yeah. Because you're right. It just feels like, nope, he has a great character, but now he has to be evil. And then in Apocalypse, like, you give him a family just to fridge the family so he can go evil again. Yeah. But then you don't give him the son that the whole movie is shedding. Like,
right.
So many feelings about that.
Him screaming in the forest was literally what he was saying to all the writers. Like, is this what you want from me?
Which also, yeah, there's so much else there, and the fact that honestly, like, Peter Maximoff is his son, and also that means Peter Maximoff is Jewish. Like, there's a lot of conversation about all those things there. I want him to be his son. It's important. But even putting that aside, I felt like I could believe the. Here's the thing: do you think that he is going for revenge as much as it is about, like, she's a danger that has to be stopped? Because I took it more. I feel like it is. There's a good deal of it being revenge, but also, especially from Hank, but also from Magneto, there is at least some sense of, like, Charles has unleashed this danger. This is going to be a danger to all of us. Because also remember, like, part of what Magneto has done is he feels he's finally found safety for him and his people. Mm-hmm. And now, because of what Jean has done, the military has come and, like, brought these helicopters to what is supposed to be his safe place. And so I guess I didn't feel like for him it was a total betrayal, because it didn't feel like it was just mwahaha revenge. It was like, my safety is being attacked. The thing that I've built my life towards is being threatened. This has to stop.
I think he made the decision before he knew all of that. He said, Hank right away told it, he's like, she killed Mystique, and he's like, help me find her. Before knowing what Hank's intentions were, he's like, I'm going to kill her. And then it wasn't until later when they were having their little bonfire talk that, he's like, this is going to risk everything that you built. So I don't know.
But remember, it's when Jean is there, before he knows whose blood it was, that the military comes after her on his land.
Yeah, and I feel like he saved those guys too, so it didn't look like, she was there as much. I don't know. I think he just immediately, they had him revert back to, like, I'm a killer.
That's fair.
But you might be right too. Who knows? Damn writers.
I'm probably I'm headcanoning what I want them to have done with it, because you're right. The writing is a little sloppier than it should have been, for sure.
But I do love, we were talking about this a little bit with what they did with his little island there, because that's totally right from the comics. It's supposed to be Genosha, which is such an interesting thing, because originally in the comics it was like where his base was with the Brotherhoods of Mutants, but it also became like this place where they would capture mutants and take them there and pretty much make them do slave labor.
Oof.
So eventually, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, there's like tons of Genosha stories and stuff, and it's not always the same, right? But it's like sometimes it's very kind of Magneto up to no good, and sometimes it's more of like a safe haven for mutants. And
I'm pretty sure in Civil War he eventually goes to the United Nations and is like, we want our own nation where you guys can't bother us. We won't bother you. You could just, you stay there, we'll stay here. And they give it to him.
Yeah.
And then House of M happens, and that's where they take Wanda to try to, like, fix her, which obviously doesn't work. And then somewhere, many storylines after that is where he goes to Charles and they're like, let's recreate this utopia for our people. And they do go do it together. So that's why the last 2 minutes of this movie were really good to me.
So I think all the stuff with Eric there and the separation, that raises some great questions about the second big thing I want us to talk about, which is the general mutant question. But just pulling it back to Jean a bit then. So what could have been a better way for Charles or for others to handle this? Jean starts to grow up. We start to realize that her powers are going to be off the chart and she might not have the ability to control them. What are options then?
I think it's really complicated. Like, there's no real solution to a person with too much power where that power is innate, right?
Right.
I mean, in the real world, we have problems where we have people with too much power and they do horrible things often, and we have solutions to that because we can take away power, because human world power is generally power that is invested in that person by other people, right? By disproportional control over resources and a large number of people acting in concert, often directed by one person, by a dictator or by some sort of other authoritarian. But in X-Men or in any kind of superhero media, really, you get individuals who that power is part of them, right? It's part of their identity. It's not like, I think, one thing that sort of sets the X-Men apart from a lot of other superhero type stories is that often we think of, like, Spider-Man is a human who gets bit by a radioactive spider and then he has powers, right? And yeah, that's part of him, but it's not like the DNA he was born with, right? Whereas
he's not a literal different species the way that Xavier literally says they are in his papers.
Yeah, which is scientifically inaccurate, right? Because they can reproduce with humans, therefore, and have children who can then have offspring. Ergo, ipso facto, they're not actually a different species, isn't that? I think that's how the biology works.
I guess I'm not using the right phrase, but yeah,
no,
Homo
I think
sapiens
he uses
and
that language.
Homo sapiens and Homo Neanderthal, or not Homo Neanderthal, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals did reproduce together, but were considered different. Whatever the terminology, it is a subset of species. The idea is that in the same way that like Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were biologically different, like offshoots, that Homo mutanus or whatever the hell they call it is another different offshoot. Right.
So humans and Neanderthals are both Homo sapiens.
Right.
Neanderthals are Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis, whatever. And I think humans are anyway. But the point being that they make it, I think they make it sound like it's actually a different species, whereas it's a different whatever that next level of...
They call them Homo superior, right?
Subspecies is the word. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
But the point is that they are a biologically different category in a way that Superman or Captain America are not.
Well, Superman is even
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
Yeah. Oh my God!
Okay.
Yes, Captain America.
Please talk about
or
the point,
wrong universe.
The point being that, thus, in X3 they come up with a way of rewriting someone's DNA, or maybe it suppresses powers some other way. I forget how, but being like, oh, we'll just rewrite their genetic code to take their powers away. There isn't really this the same kind of solutions that we have in the real world, right? And you raise a good point about accountability, where who is Charles accountable to, who is Jean accountable to, but to me it's like these people have these huge powers, and it's, I guess, I don't think there's a good solution, basically, right? Where if somebody does something horrible, you've got to try and find a way of stopping them from doing more horrible things, but it's not obvious.
You can start to reverse it there to see if the horrible things would have even happened if he didn't, do what he did.
Sure.
There's also no trust. That's the issue where you go back to the talking about control, because they decided that she was not going to be able to control her powers without just letting her grow up and see what would happen. She obviously could control the Phoenix Force by the end of it, so they really underestimated her. And that's what's happening is these men are underestimating, her and not allowing her. They're too scared to see if she can actually just control it, and they think they know what's best, so they're going to, put blocks in her memory.
Yeah.
Where none of this might have happened if they didn't do that. So it's so it's such a...
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because you're right. It's the assumption of all of that is because she can't control her powers, and they're never giving her the chance to show that she could.
Right.
But of course, that's the whole. It's the whole thing of it's kind of like when the consequences of being wrong are so high, and to me, I feel like it's a concern that I have a lot of times with these things of. Trying to think how best to explain this. In a way, obviously, Wanda is a character who's been in a lot of our minds a lot because of WandaVision, and I don't want to spoil anything from that TV show, but it all goes back to her actions in the movie Civil War, and I've always sort of been a little frustrated that there's never actually been any legal ramifications or accountability for the actions she took that got innocent people killed. And it may well be that she did the right thing, but we never actually explored that. And I feel in some ways this reminded me a lot of that, of especially because by the end of the movie, I mean, they literally renamed the school the Jean Grey School. And part of that's like a slap at Xavier and how much he's screwed up and that he's kind of off on his own. And there's a lot of good stuff there. But it felt like it was so erasing the actual harm that Jean had done. And I guess...
Yeah, why wasn't it called the Mystique School?
Right. You know... And I guess, I mean, this is just always a very much an action movie trope of you can, like, screw up early, get people killed, but if you save people at the end, then everything is forgiven and forgotten. And you're right, like, Ashley, it is this very, like, I can't just say, like, oh, Jean's a murderer. Like, I mean, there's the Dark Phoenix Force.
Yeah, we're forgetting the Dark Phoenix Force part of it all.
Yeah, those aren't even her powers, right?
She's it's not even her technically doing it. Yeah, and that's why, like, she kind of sacrifices herself at the end, which is to save everybody instead of kill everybody, because she can't actually, you know, do whatever she was trying to do with disintegrating chick or whatever that evil person said. And that's why I guess they would do that, because it technically wasn't her. And it is something else that was Charles's fault, because if they would have just gotten out of there, she wouldn't have gotten taken over and yada, 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 go back to the beginning. You know what I mean?
Right. And I mean, there's all sorts of questions of moral culpability there. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I can, if one person, you know, like, I don't think Charles is ever going to be completely responsible for Jean's actions. She is still somewhat there, too. But yeah, I feel like because we don't understand the Phoenix Force at all, I don't know to what extent it is or isn't her fault, like that Mystique dies. Because you're right, the whole...
Well, she warned her 100 times. I can't control it. Please back off. And, you know, she kept telling Eric, she kept telling Mystique. I don't know how many more times she could tell her, back off, I can't. She was trying to warn her. And you could see the pain on her face after she saw what happened.
Yeah,
it sucks.
And I mean, I would say that I think, like, the kind of influence Charles had, or what sort of mental intrusions he made, I certainly don't think that removes Jean's culpability for anything she does. I think the Dark Phoenix Force complicates that, but you know, there's often enough, you know, blame to go around, right? It's like it doesn't have to be divided up like a pie. It's like, well, you could be 100% responsible and you could be 100% responsible. Like, it doesn't have to be 50-50 or 80-20 or whatever. But you know, I do think, like, it's frustrating because it's like Charles, in terms of his powers, has the optimal powers for actually helping Jean. Right? In the beginning, right? Like when she's a kid. And the fact that he like takes sort of the easy way out and it's like, oh, I'll just erase this, I'll block this, and like everything will be, you know, easier. Like that, I don't know. I don't like it. Like,
yeah.
And it to some extent, I mean, I guess in some versions that's Xavier and in some versions it's not. I think some people kind of would rather see a story where it's one and would rather see a story where it's the other. Like, I think, Matthew, this story is somewhat more satisfying to you because it's a little vindicating in the, like, well, when people have too much power, they often do things like this, right? When they think they're right. And to me, it's sort of like, yeah, I mean, some people will and some people won't. And Charles has been written in different ways where he can kind of be either. You know, personally, I think mind control, like where you can actually control someone's actions for at least for a limited period of time, it would be like a great power to have. Like, in a fight, like two people are trying to fight each other and you're like, stop, and then they stop, and it's like, okay, now we're gonna sit down and talk because I'm forcing you to. I'm going to allow you to, you know, you're going to say what you have to say, but we're going to, you know, resolve this peacefully because I'm going to stop. Usually physical violence is the option we have in terms of actually stopping physical violence, right? It's that's why war is a thing, because when you have one belligerent side, the other side can either get run over or they can oppose it with violence. Yes, there's various things we can do to try and stop the violence. But, you know, if someone's punching you in the face, like you're getting punched in the face, you're blocking, you're moving, or you're hitting them first. Whereas if you have some kind of mind control, it's like, I have no problem being like, yeah, no, you have to stop punching me in the face. And then they do. But when making these kind of long-term, like, oh, I'm going to, you know, kind of erase a part of who you are. Like, you know, I mean, and I think she did cause the accident. I thought was pretty clear, right? With her parents.
Yeah, that was weird. The way that they decided to start it, and that being her backstory, which is not it from the comics. I mean, the one in the comics has to do with a car, but that was a really strange turn, because in the comics it makes a little bit more sense why he did what he did, because she was a young girl. She sees her best friend hit by a car in front of her, and when she runs over, she's holding her friend's as she's dying, and that's when her powers emerge, and she taps into her friend's emotions, and she feels what it feels like to die.
Oof, yeah, that's some trauma right there.
So she starts losing her powers, are completely uncontrollable, and her parents, both of them, take her to Xavier, and that's kind of the pain and that feeling is what he starts out blocking off. And that's kind of where it starts. Like, he sees, I did that for her. So then everything that started happening to her that was kind of threatening that to maybe be exposed or, you know, be more traumatic for her, he just kept making these compartments inside of her mind. And it got out of control.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, that sort of speaks to the, like, I mean, at some point, he should, like, if he decides to take that direction, at some point he should be like, okay, we're going to need to deal with this.
Yes,
right?
I agree.
We're going to need to deal with these emotions, and maybe gradually we can do it. Like, you know, telepathic therapy
sessions.
Basically. Yeah, exactly. Or, like, actual just therapy.
Therapy?
Right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the things that occurs to me throughout all of this is the difference between being sort of like the decider versus the executor of the decision. You know, and part of what comes to me in the story you just told me, Ashley, is that the parents go to Xavier and say, this is what we as her parents feel this child needs. And you can get into a lot of questions about, like, should the child actually be a part of that conversation, not just the parents? I think that's a legitimate point. But at least now it's not, someone is saying to Charles, here is the goal. We're going to ask you to help us to get to this goal that we have set. For me, that's fundamentally different than Charles coming along and saying, okay, no one else is watching out for this girl anymore. I'm now going to decide what's best for her and how to get there.
Right.
And I feel like that...
I don't.
Go
ahead.
do.
You agree first, and then I'll disagree.
Well, and I was going to say, well, let me just finish, and then we or disagree and agree in any order. I feel like that's where to me, the ideal would be, because you're right, I do like stories where the people with power are corrupt. It doesn't always have to be, though. I would love a situation where Charles starts to realize what's happening. Maybe Mystique or someone else, pokes at him, and then he starts to let Jean know, a 10 or 11 or 12-year-old Jean, saying, listen, you do have these powers. I want you to know I'm holding some of that back from you. I'm willing to start helping you, how should we do this together? And that making Jean a part of the decision of, it's because now it's not him deciding for her. It's her saying, this is the goal I want. Charles, can you help?
Right.
So,
I have to agree first.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
I think you're right. Mine's not going to be very deep. I just think that they were trying, when they rewrote this film, they were trying to cherry pick certain things from the comics and try to make it work in the script. And I think it does kind of hurt the character of Charles.
Yeah, I mean, or makes him kind of less good, right? Like,
yeah.
Which, if that's how you want him to be, that's cool, right? And, maybe that's more interesting. I think the second way you put it, Matthew, was closer to something that I think that's a real difference when you have, when you're like asking the kid, hey, look, you had these powers, they were out of control, you weren't able to control them, so I've dampened them basically for you. Would you like to develop access to more of your powers, or not? That's a choice. And, we're going to work together on figuring out the best way to go about doing that, because you need to be able to control them. You can't just be going around with these totally uncontrolled, it's a little bit like Dexter and his dad, but
yeah, some extent. I mean, Dexter, I think, actually is a great example of, because in some ways the point of all this to me is you can have whatever powers you want. You cannot exist as a danger to other people, and I think, obviously, I think all of us probably have very strong feelings about all the many problems in our criminal justice system, and that's not what this is about. But I think the basic idea of, in order to live in society, we need to be able to trust that you are not going to pose an active danger to others, and that if you are, then that's when society has to get involved to some extent. Like, this kind of goes back to what you were talking about at the beginning, Paul. The whole point with powers is that it raises those questions, is the, like, if you have these powers, do you now pose more of a danger if you have less control over them?
Right, and I would say I definitely would push back hard on the you can't be allowed to exist if you as posing a danger to others. I think you can't do things harmful to others. And
I wouldn't have put it. I didn't mean to put it in those strong terms by any means. No.
It sounded a little Minority Report,
Oh no, it's more that.
But
like,
I get what you mean.
That there's an understanding of it. You're going to not choose to use your powers to harm others, and that if you are
right.
It's the Hulk of the situation.
Right. I mean, because to me, part of there was a great article I read a long time ago by a Scandinavian criminologist, and they basically were using the example of like a scorpion in terms of talking about like a scorpion isn't evil, and you don't hate the scorpion because it's deadly, but you also understand that a scorpion may do harm, and so you
don't put it next to people it's going to sting, basically.
Right, yeah, and that the idea being that, like, that it was not trying to compare humans to, like, to insects or anything like that, but that, so that if a person is, like, if you know that a person is a, like, danger to cause harm to others, then you can try and, like, stop that and put them in a situation where they're not able to harm others without necessarily being about, like, we hate you, we want to punish you.
Yeah.
With a mutant, I think it raises this whole other set of questions of, like, look at someone like Scott Summers. Like, first of all, God help me, I want there to sometime be somewhere make an X-Men movie where Scott Summers has a personality besides being the jerk boyfriend who Wolverine gets to win a girl from. Like,
I felt so bad for his, like, Scott loses so much in this little franchise. Like, he loses his brother, he loses Jean, and they just breeze over it like it's nothing.
Yeah, he never gets any kind of a personality whatsoever. But, like, for someone like him, if he opens his eyes, he's going to do incredible harm to people. Is it therefore, like, legal to say that he cannot go out in public without wearing something to stop him from lasering people?
No, you just aren't allowed to laser people. Like, that's... You know what I mean? like, there's already a law for that. There's all these things that people are always like, oh, but what about this? Like, we need these new counterterrorism laws or this or that. It's like, there's already, but if somebody goes into this bathroom, maybe they'll do this. It's like, it's already illegal to do those things. Like,
Right.
Well, but the reality is, like, if he's not allowed to laser people, that means he has to take precautions against. So it basically becomes
right. And then if
the
he
same
doesn't, then you have a what we know as a crime,
right?
Possibly a homicide, possibly just a maiming.
Couple I was gonna say
probably
maiming.
a lot of property destruction.
We don't know because again, his powers vary greatly based on what the plot needs in the moment.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like. We teach kids not to hit each other, right? Like,
right.
People, like, if you have, a 10-year-old, you have to stop them from taking your car keys and getting in your car and driving and getting into a crash or whatever. And so, when we go back to, like, Jean as a kid, it's like, I think it's reasonable to kind of be like, okay, let's kind of dial back these powers in the short term and then have a conversation. And then ultimately, you'll be who you're going to be. And if you do bad things, then we'll hold you accountable for doing bad things. Right. Was there ever any kind of like, I don't remember, like, was there ever any police like, oh, she killed someone? Like,
oh yeah, they bring in those.
They do, right?
It's funny because they're called the MCU cops. If you look, all their badges say MCU.
Mutant Control Unit.
Control Unit.
Right.
And so they bring the neck things that were my favorite in the
things,
comics that make you lose your powers. I can't remember what they were called.
And
that's the whole the inhibitors. Yeah, and that goes all the way to like the train scene, all that stuff that you kind of like block out. I love the train scene just because I think it gets to showcase everybody's powers beautifully.
Like
who's
as
the
a
guy
set
with like
piece,
the
it's
whip
really
dread with like the hair braid whips?
Honestly, I'm like, did you guys just like close your eyes, go through the Marvel Encyclopedia and pick a page? They're like, this guy, throw him in there. I have no idea. I'm so sorry to everybody who does.
It's okay. There were some random ones who I wish their powers were more explained, but they were definitely interesting characters. Well, so let's get to the other main question I think that this movie raises, and we've already been kind of dancing around it, but really just to hit it more squarely. Because it's the question, obviously, that is at so much of the heart of all the X-Men stories, which is Xavier and Magneto having these different approaches to how do you be this minority that is, hated and feared within a larger society. And actually, you talked about the Genosa, the kind of Magneto as a separate thing, and I really liked that because I felt like in some ways it makes this more about like an assimilation or separation kind of argument, where now it's no longer as much even about like, are we going to take over or not? But it's about Xavier saying, if we help them enough, if we push ourselves enough, they'll love us. And Magneto is not even just saying like, I want to fight them. He's just saying, what if we just go off and do our own thing? Kind of to what you're saying, Paul, or what I was bringing up, you responding to. If the whole question is, how do we legally function around them? What if we just don't function around them? What if we just create our totally own society? And I think that was my favorite part of the movie, honestly, was the way it highlighted those different ideas and the problems with them, especially in what Charles is trying to do.
The dialogue between Charles and Eric throughout all the movies are probably my favorite parts. Like, I love when he comes to kill Jean and Charles shows up and Charles is making his great speech and he's just like, Charles, nobody cares anymore. You have messed this up beyond belief. Throughout the years, like, he had his own little thing going. He's making it safe for people. He's finding mutants in a way that Charles isn't, to bring them to safety, to create their own, thing. And Charles is just like, but I still want to talk to the president. It's like, no, you don't get that. You don't get it. Magneto's actually the one doing the right thing, except for trying to kill Jean.
Except for all the bad things he does. He's doing the right thing.
Do you all know what I mean when I talk about respectability politics?
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and give me a quick sum?
It's the idea that I think you see a lot in terms of discussions about like how you deal with issues of being a minority, and it's in terms
or any oppressed group, right? I
mean,
it could be an oppressed majority.
Exactly.
Okay.
So respectability politics is it's a term that's critical of the idea of that if we just try and like act normal, then people will like us a lot. And so like some of the ways the term is used is like when there was movement within like the gay community of like let's just show them that we're normal people and not have like the half naked people at queer pride parades, or when like black leaders are very critical of rap music and saying like we need to not scare white America. We need to not scare straight America.
Okay.
And and the critique of that is it's called respectability politics, and it's there's some back and forth there, but I think it's a very legit critique. Without ever raising the issue, I thought they did such a good job of that here, and that there's Xavier especially, like his whole idea is this whole like, we don't want them to fear us. We want them to see that we are normal. We want them to see that they can not be afraid. And so much was about stifling the humanity. And I wish I'd had more of it, but I love Mystique wanting to go out on her own because she comes to realize like he's shutting down everything that makes her who she is.
Right. I like some of her lines a lot. Like, you should, we know what the X in X-Men means, and technically it should be X-women because we're the ones saving all the men all the time.
Yes.
But yeah, it's interesting. Like Charles, and it's how they end it with him kind of being like, you suck at your job so much that you have to literally retire right now and go away. I don't know. It's such a left turn for what good the character does do, because underneath it all, I mean, Charles Xavier is, a good person, I would think, with the ethics, talk about it. So it's hard to see them just, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Somebody take over.
I think it's, to some sense, it's like an intractable problem where, there's bigotry. Right. And, there's, say you've got two groups of people, right? Mutants and non-mutant humans. And I mean, the mutants are humans, but they're not, it's a little complicated from a, biological standpoint. But, some mutants, like, their powers are, like, not, they're so much different. Like, a mutant with some little tiny power compared to, like, Jean Grey or Xavier or Magneto. Right. Like, I mean, Mystique's a good example because it's like, okay, her power actually could be used to, nefariously to great effect, but also she could just like live normally, you know? And I mean, she has the perfect like blend in power, right? Like just quite literally, like she could be whoever she wants to be. But like, I've never liked the idea of like separation, and like I like the idea of Genosha being a place, where it's like, yeah, if that's what you want to do, you can go there, right? But at the same time, it's like I do think you need to find a way to coexist because, like, well, there's one planet. I mean, there's a lot of planets, and at times they actually travel, and they kind of sort of touched on that here, but not really very deeply.
Yeah.
But right, we're kind of sidestepping that one. But like, yeah, ultimately, you can't just have like on Earth in our current reality, like you can't just be like, oh, these people are going to live here and these people are going to live there, and the people in this place get to just decide they want to live however they want to live, and this other place can live however they want to live. Like, I
don't know. That's pretty North Korea.
I know, and it's terrible. Like,
it's not working out very well for them.
Randall Park notwithstanding. So the interview, but like, I mean, North Korea might actually be one of the least in terms of how it affects other nations. Well, it is probably indisputably the least, right? In terms of
I think
how much direct. But it's like, let's say you just had a state of Texas. Let's say Texas left the U.S. and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on with Texas right now, right? In terms of the freezing, and right. That's horrible. And we can talk about like how many people in Texas don't support the government of Texas, and then how many do, and in North Korea is like a 20 million person hostage situation. But that's not my point at all. My point is if Texas was just its own country and it could just do whatever it wanted, and it's just like, well, we're just going to go big with oil. It's like, well, that actually affects everyone else on the planet, right? In the long run. And so, you could have mutants on Genosha, but they're not really separate from everybody else because some mutants have powers that are so strong they can change reality across the globe, right? Across the multiverse. And so, I mean, there are people with god-level powers in these stories. And so you're never going to be able to sidestep the, you need to find a way to coexist. Or one group is going to basically try to eliminate the other ultimately. And there's always going to be friction. I think there's always going to be some level of bigotry. But, on some level, I think both are wrong, Magneto and Xavier. In that, I mean, the whole respectability politics of it all. Oh, if we just do so much good, it's like, yeah, good luck, Charles.
Right.
That's not going to, if you want to recruit people to completely voluntarily be X-Men or whatever and go around and do good things, cool, good on you, go do good things, right? Go fight against, the Brotherhood doing bad things. But like,
yeah, it always occurred to me, what happened if you're born a mutant and you just want to, like, write computer games for a living, or like, be a garbage, like the idea of like, okay, you're born mutant, so now you have to be part of this big fight has always been a, and granted, that's a conceit of the comic books, and that maybe those people exist and we just don't hear about them very much. But
I think so.
I think a big part of that respectability politics idea is, and especially from Charles, is by being a mutant, you have a responsibility to be that kind of like the model, to be the example of what a good mutant can be. When it's like, and this is a very real concern. It's like, if I go out and do like 10 shitty things as a white person, no one's going to look at me and go, oh, look, that's proof that white people are terrible. Well, today maybe, and with some good
if
reason.
You do it with a neck beard and whatever, I don't know.
But yeah, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's like, the more that you are part of a group that is like, the viewpoint of them is considered up for debate for whatever stupid reason or another, then the more like you're expected to do, to prove that. Because you're right. I think in this, neither Xavier nor Magneto is completely right, and that there is some. a hard middle ground to be found of how do you find that balance. And it brings me back to why I'm so sad Mystique got killed.
Right.
That's another
Yeah.
story.
And I mean, to me, it's like, you can't put that responsibility on someone, but at the same time, I do think there's some value in acknowledging that to some extent it exists, not the responsibility, but just the fact, there's a lot of things where it's like, if you take these actions, this is a likely outcome. Right. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that you're wrong for taking these actions, right? That doesn't mean that we should blame you in some larger way, but it's like some understanding of just what happens when A leads to B. And some of these things aren't really true, right? I mean, there's some things where it's like, I don't think rap music is the reason that, that we have that a lot of the, racism that exists.
No, of course,
exists.
no more than blues music was 50 years ago when it was claimed to be, whatever it is.
Right, exactly. But like when some particular event happens to a particular person, there often are going to be there often are repercussions in terms of how one person's view is influenced by particular actions taken by a person or by their own experience, basically.
Right. And I mean, you see this a lot in terms of, and I think the answer to that often is combating that whole idea. Like every time that a black person who was shot by cops, like people try to bring up, but this person, like, look at this like minor criminal thing he did. Right. The argument is always like, he doesn't have to be like, the good kid from Harvard who got killed. Like, it's none of it makes it okay what the police did, and challenging that. Now pulling it back to where we are with the X-Men, I think, I think you're right. I think that's more than anything. That's the trap that Charles falls into, and I think because Paul, I think what you're saying is that like for a person to make those own choices for themselves is fine. It's that Charles is trying to impose that on everybody else. That he's trying to say, like, you have to push yourself harder for all the rest of us instead of letting it. And then he never convinces anyone.
No.
And this, I think, kind of getting back to what we were talking about with Charles and mind control, I think this could be probably its whole other topic. But I feel like one of the things, the dangers with Charles is once you can actually control someone's mind, you never actually have to try and change their mind, right? You never have to try and actually be like, let me convince you to do this other thing, because you can just make them do the other thing.
Right.
I think it's interesting with Magneto's character because of with the separation and stuff, what happens to him in Age of Apocalypse and how he does choose to try to do Charles's way. And then when somebody at his work almost dies, he saves them in a very X-Men Charles-y type of way. And that in turn makes him lose his entire family. So he's just completely checked out of, Charles, I'm not doing it that way. I'm going to just make my own place and this and that, because he just doesn't see. He tried, couple times he tried to coexist. And I think the whole point of these stories is just trying to show us, like, be nice to each other. Because it's like, it's such a shame. Like, yeah, you would want everything goes so well until it doesn't. And it only takes one tiny thing to mess it up. Just like the entire relationship that Charles had built with the army and the president was taken away by Jean flipping over, 3 cop cars. Yeah. It's a little extreme.
Well, and I think part of it, you're right, is that, but it's also a nice reminder of the fragility of this kind of thing,
Exactly.
That it can, that unfortunately, like the way that hate works, especially in a culture like ours, it can go that quickly. And then I think that's one thing that that it's unfortunately a very good reminder of in that regard. So I do want us to talk. We've basically taken this entire episode about Dark Phoenix and not talked about the Dark Phoenix much, because from an ethics standpoint, I'm not sure there is too much there. But I know especially that you both really liked the original story and had a lot of concerns about that. So let's just take a few moments there. How does this version of the Dark Phoenix differ from what we get in older versions of the story, especially in the comics or in the animated shows?
I mean, this one and then The Last Stand, they just kind of made. I always said, if you know who the character Onslaught is, it was a mix of Charles and Magneto, and that's what they kind of make her powers look like. It just doesn't make any sense to what a cosmic being's power would be. I know in the animated show it was a lot of fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a ton of fire. And the difference is the relationships that she has with the characters. Like, you could change the whole story, but you need a Wolverine there to bring her out of it if you're going to save the character. So I felt like going into that with her only having a Scott and Wolverine's not there and then a whole different cast of characters, I kind of knew that they were going to make, she didn't die, but they were going to kind of get rid of her by the end of it because there was nobody there to kind of bring her back. And that's kind of sad.
I mean, I was happy that in this one they at least made it like the sort of cosmic power that it wasn't in X3. So that felt a little more in keeping with, with canon, I guess. Which, you don't have to, but it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me in X-Men 3, but here, they did it in such a sort of confusing way where I felt like they didn't really give us a satisfying explanation of the power, of the force, of the... Oh, hold on. I actually looked it up. What are they called?
The Dabari?
The Dabari. Yeah. I mean, which I don't remember seeing anywhere else, but maybe...
Is that the Jessica Chastain of it all?
Yeah.
The Dabari?
Their people are called the Dabari.
Yeah.
They even gave us that 3-minute scene where she's trying to explain it. And I'm like, so she's ego? Like, what's happening? I don't know what we're talking about.
Oh, they are actually. Okay. So they are the I think they're a bigger part and less like we are the villains kind of in the original, Dark Phoenix saga. But
the Shi'ar Empire was the big part of the original Phoenix saga.
Right. And again, I don't want to get too lost on the names and details. I just want to get to the heart of the story part.
They just mess all that up because it makes it so much like that has a lot more to do with Charles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were within the sphere of influence of the Shi'ar Empire.
Right. Right.
But yeah, so like I feel like the fact that the movie kind of was like, oh yeah, we'll just have this, but not really... I don't know, maybe like it was trying to do too many things at once because it had all this stuff with, with Mystique and Charles and Magneto and Hank and that's all very interesting, right?
Right.
But kind of feels like it has so little to do with the Dark Phoenix storyline.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like you could have this entire movie without the Dark Phoenix at all, and it's a good movie. Which says,
it could just be like, Jean's really powerful, and she doesn't know how to control her powers anymore because they like whatever Charles wrote over her, system hardware or something she unwrote. Like, yeah, you could do it without that. And the original Dark Phoenix story, like, I think the relationship between her and Scott is really important in it. And, you were saying, like, you feel like you can't do it without Wolverine. I'm like, I feel like you can't do it without Scott being, like, a character. Yeah. As opposed to, like, a cardboard, just, like, and I'm like so rarely like looking for more romances in my stories, right? That's just like not what I'm generally that interested in.
Right.
But like if you have a story where that's an important part, it's like would anybody just watch a movie about the Montagues and the Capulets and be like, oh yeah, this is just like a history of these two families fighting each other. Like, is that a thing? I don't know. Maybe it is. But like, like you don't take like Romeo and Juliet out of Romeo and Juliet. Like, right. So it's like when this story, that was a really important part of the story from, the versions I'd seen in the animation. Right. I didn't really read the comics of it, but, to not have it there, it makes the story feel like it's missing something that's such like a critical part of it. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, because that is kind of the story I had expected. I think I may have seen some version of it in comics or animation, but certainly
maybe they even shot that story and then we're like, oh, let's change it.
I mean, that's a story that we've seen before, like in many times. I honestly, the one that comes to me clearest is Willow at the end of season 6 of Buffy. But I think it's a story in other times as well where there is someone who is now like they have incredible power, they're about to do something horribly destructive to everything, and someone who has a strong emotional relationship with them is able to connect with like the person inside outside of that other influence and like talk them down from doing the destructive thing.
Yeah. They proxied that, like they try to with Charles at the end when, you know, she forgives him. He apologizes. She actually forgives him. And then the last look that she gives is to Charles. And I'm like, okay, so this whole Scott thing is just not very important at this point because he tries to talk her off the ledge. And she's like, I know I like you, but I don't care.
But even then, I didn't quite understand. Like, so is she still fully the Dark Phoenix fighting Jessica Chastain at the end? Because I thought what happened was that Jessica Chastain had, like, I'm going to keep calling her that because I have no idea what the character's name is. And I don't think anyone ever cared.
Don't care.
Like, had, like, taken enough of the Phoenix out of her that now there's only, like, some of the Phoenix in Jean Grey, and so she can have control again, and thus she can, you know, destroy herself and the Phoenix and the Dubai, whatever the heck is.
Debris.
Okay. Yeah, we're not going to conjugate.
Declension, that's declension. Latin. But yeah, anyway, so...
I think you're right. I think we saw her go from Dark Phoenix to just Phoenix.
Right. And so, yeah, so the movie ends with a character named Phoenix dying. Am I just right? I'm understanding that part of it?
I guess. I don't know whether it was dying since nobody ever actually dies in these. I think she went off to be the best version of her Phoenix self that she could be, going around pollinating planets, it looked like. I don't know.
Because Mary and I looked at each other and we got to the end of the movie and Mary literally said, like, wait, it's about a character named Phoenix. How is she dead? I don't understand.
Right.
Don't worry, girl. They're going to name a school after you.
Okay, so you don't die that way.
I mean, I think when you're the Phoenix, you don't actually die. You disappear, and that's I think happened in numerous storylines, right? Like,
right. I mean,
so she had to take the whatever was happening in the animated one. Like she had to sacrifice herself the same way. At least in X2, they did it a little bit better, even though that made no sense. But she like physically sacrificed herself before she became the Phoenix, and that's what made her the Phoenix, which makes no sense.
Right.
So that historically, that character always kind of goes out like that.
Okay.
But then often comes back.
Right? Exactly. Right. Hence being called a survey says.
Ooh, a phoenix.
Ding, 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 ding.
It would have been nice to get some of that because I didn't get any of that from the end of the movie.
Yeah.
What I did get is on my very brief notes for this, I have written, reminds me of Willow on Buffy.
Oh, good. I'm glad that we got the same direction.
Wasn't there. Just you.
Okay.
That's awesome.
And then right after that I have, if there was a god, would you kill it? Anyway.
What?
Okay, so I think that's probably a decent place of wrapping up. I guess I would just say as a last thing, like, honestly, it makes me happy that if we are getting X-Men back, well, this is a whole other topic entirely.
Oh yeah, no, let's. Oh,
I was gonna say, like, I'm glad that we get more TV shows instead of movies because you can't do it all in one movie. But I'll edit that out.
Mm-hmm.
At least they finished with a really good character arc for Magneto. I feel like he's the only one who got a really decent storyline by the end.
Yeah.
If you start with First Class, like Eric's character is the only one who has the most growth by the end of the film. Like he starts out just being like full of rage and pain and has no care for anyone who gets in his way, even people who care about him. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he was the one being there for Charles at his time of need when he didn't even know he needed him. You know, he's like, I need to be by myself. It just shows like a beautiful evolution of this version of Magneto for these movies, who is always throughout them this anti-hero. He was the anti-hero of the franchise.
Yeah. Go ahead.
They put a pin in it beautifully, I thought, for him.
I felt like way for both him and Charles. I feel like in that regard, I am very satisfied by these movies, and that if the central story is the friendship, the brotherhood between Xavier and Magneto, that I thought this was a really nice way to end it. I did text Paul towards the end because, the final scene of Dark Knight Rises of, Catwoman, Selina Kyle in a cafe getting to meet up with Bruce Wayne. I thought at first, sorry. I thought at first that's where they were going, and I thought like Jean Grey was going to sit down and have coffee with Xavier, and I was like, are we really getting that again? But when it was I just thought the two of them sitting down and him being like, let's play a game of chess. Like, I loved that. I did think that was a great ending for both of them.
He's like, I'll take it easy on it.
No, you won't.
No, you won't. He's like, you're right. I'm like, oh, I love you two so much. Can I watch?
And then 1,000 fan fictions were written.
No.
Paul, any comments about those two characters and how they wrap up, or any other kind of last thoughts in general?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't rewatch this, so I just saw it the one time. I tried to see it again. Maybe I was going to watch like the first 20 minutes again, but I didn't find it anywhere. So
that's fair.
I don't know. I feel like, I guess it was better than Apocalypse.
Yes.
That's my review.
That's a good call.
Yeah. So, Apocalypse, Wolverine Origins.
Yes.
Like
I don't even want to talk about that
X3
movie.
Are all. I think X3 and this are maybe close. I'm not sure.
I think the first half of X3 is quite good. Yeah, and like I said, it's a great start to it. Like, it sets up so many great plot lines and just then goes nowhere with all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching it and feeling like there were way too many characters introduced, and that's a decent pilot,
Exactly.
So I'll rewatch it with that lens. But yeah, I think the Dark Phoenix movie, like, my rating would be like probably not as bad as a lot of people said. But far from the best X-Men movie. Yeah. Not in the top 5.
Yeah.
Listen, speaking of Dark Knight Rises, you throw a Hans Zimmer soundtrack over anything and I'm gonna love it. I can't help it. I love him. I love the score to this movie. I like the intensity. I like what he brings to movies. He makes everything, even like the train going down the tracks, just this epic music. I'm a sucker for the X-Men. I'm a sucker for Hans Zimmer. You put them, and Dark Phoenix, you put them all in one movie, and I cannot help but like it. I can't help it. Do whatever you want.
Look, I think there's a great movie in there. I think there's some really bad editing and writing choices, but I think it raises some great questions, and that to me is the heart and soul of what we do here. So, and I'm glad I got to discuss it with you two. So, thank you all so much for being a part of this. To our listeners and fans, what'd you all think? If you remember this movie, or even if you didn't, the topics we're talking about obviously have relevance to so many different things today. Let us know what you think. Find us on Facebook or Twitter by looking for The Ethical Panda. That's kind of my name for all the different ethical podcasts I do. This one, the Star Wars Universe podcast. Ashley and I have just done a whole set on The Stand on PandaVision. You can also find all of those on strandedpanda.com. Also, if you want to support these podcasts, the single best thing you can do right now is help us grow. We've been growing for a bit now. We've got a lot of new voices in. It's a great thing. As we get more listeners, we get more conversation, we get more potential guests, more topics, things like that. And it really just does so much to help me do the things I need to make these podcasts possible. So if you like these podcasts, share it with a friend. Tell a friend, like, hey, you remember that conversation we're having about this topic? Check out this podcast. Forward it on to them. Write a review for us. Those are all things that are just a huge way to help us grow this network, to help us grow the number of people who are part of these conversations, and just make it a lot more fun. Now, I'm not the only one doing that kind of stuff. Paul, for people who want to find more of your work, where can they find you?
Just look for Zen Madman and things will pop up. .com, Twitter, Twitch, mostly Twitch, maybe. I don't know. But just at Zen Madman, wherever things are added.
Paul, there's a lot of great stuff out there on chess, on poker, on learning, fiction, things like that. Definitely check out zenmadman.com, as well as on those other places. So, myself, Paul, Ashley, thank you all so much. Have a great day.